Hi, I'm Scott Langdon, and this week on God and Autobiography, the podcast, it's time for our What's on Your Mind series. In this episode, Jerry and I dig into 3 different emails from the same author, Roxana. Roxana wrote in on 3 different occasions over a 1.5 year period, responding to different excerpts from Jerry's book, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher. Her story and her journey are fascinating and inspiring, and we're thrilled to share it with you in hopes that your spirit will be blessed by hearing it. If you'd like to share your story of God, please drop us an email at questions@godandautobiography.com. We'd love to hear from you. And remember, if you like what we do here, please like, share, subscribe. We really appreciate all of your support. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of What's on Your Mind. I'm Scott Langdon, and I'm here with Jerry Martin. As usual, we're here with 3 emails from the same emailer. Roxana wrote into us, and Jerry, I found these to be so interesting on their own, but putting them together, it's a correspondence over several months here in time, and putting them together, there's a real journey that Roxana goes on here.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting that she is so generous and kind of her to share this with us, because since she checks in periodically, you might say, and how the book that she's reading along, its excerpts were being posted at that point, and we get to follow that journey and what's going through her mind and heart as she reaches different stages of that journey. And so, it's a very illuminating ride to take with Roxana.
It is illuminating. I really felt like I identified with her in so many ways as I was reading through these, and I thought, what a good thing to share. And let's take an episode to really share all 3 of them and talk about them. And by the way, all of these correspondence that we talk about, and Jerry, you typically will read your responses that you had given at the time, and all of these can be found on the website at godandautobiography.com. If you want to check them out, all of these correspondences that we read. So they're always public, they're always out there from the get-go. And I say that because, number one, if you'd like to go visit the website, godandautobiography.com, and check things out for yourself, we'd love to have you over there and take a look. And also, they are written in, and we share them because, as we've talked about many times, your stories really are meaningful. Your encounters with God, and you often say, Jerry, write it down, write them down, because they can go into that mental place that it's the attic, and we can lose them, these experiences. So write them down. And when folks take the time to do that and push send and send them out to the world, to us, it's such a blessing to have them shared in this way. And so we really thank you for that. So if you'd like to share your story of God or an experience, drop us an email at questions@godandautobiography.com. We'd love to hear from you. And Jerry, I'd love to get into Roxana right now. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Well, here is her first correspondence, her first email into us. Roxana says this: I just happened to cross you on Facebook, and I feel I was meant to, because I'm suffering emotionally and physically and didn't know where to turn. I had lost my faith with a terrible incident, and also with higher education. I knew many scientists ended up believing later in their life, but it didn't work for me. I became turned away from hardcore Bible thumpers and a lot of the hypocrisy that came with some of them, especially when it came to the poor. I did not hear God, but sometimes, if I am open, get the thought, but rarely form questions. I wish I could. I'm going to try and listen better. Anxiety is throwing me around a bit. I could not get chapters 5 or 6, or maybe it was 6 or 7, but I found I could continue with the following chapters, which I'm very grateful for. Thank you. So far, so good. I am hesitantly hopeful.
Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? This is the beginning of a journey. And she is hesitantly hopeful. Hoping there's something here for her. And as I responded at the time, when she first wrote in. You are not alone, Roxana. Crises of the spirit happen to everyone. She talks about, losing her faith right at the beginning. Crises like that happen to everyone, believers and doubters alike. It is difficult, even in non-crisis times, and she has some crises here that she's referred to emotionally and physically, but even in non-crisis times, it's difficult to get in touch with God. And anxiety, which she also mentions, creates static that even the best receivers have trouble penetrating. But you may have a better connection than you realize. This is important. She may be doing a lot better. She feels she's floundering around a bit, but I I suspect she's rather has a good connection. And in any case, divine messages arrive, I told her, in surprising packages. It might just be an inner feeling, or pang of conscience, or vision of beauty, or something someone says to you that really hits home, or a task that has been put in your path, or even thoughts that seem like your own. Just let yourself be led as best you can, without distraction, resistance, or prejudgment, and you will find yourself in sync with God.
Yeah. Looking at this, I really identified with her feelings, the way she describes her feelings here about, well, a couple of things. She talks about in her experience that she'd lost her faith with a terrible incident, which she never really goes into what that is. And none of our business. It is what it is. And higher education. So in other words, when she got in more to science, she felt like that answered some questions that I guess her religious experience hadn't answered before. And um, but now she's dealing with this anxiety, and she's dealing with this uh, when she's open, gets these sort of thoughts or feelings. And so there's something to be explored there. And I find that really interesting with her sort of scientific mind. I would imagine she's somebody who wants to explore. A scientific mind typically wants to explore and get into these things. And so when she's feeling these feelings, she wants to explore those feelings. And I kind of labeled this just off the cuff because I related to it so well, the agitation phase. It's sort of like when God is kind of stirring things around and gives you in a sense, or you become aware of, or however you want to talk about it, but suddenly there's this sort of feeling that you need to engage with something that you don't understand. Things are happening, and it's not like I want to get to the bottom of an explanation of it. Maybe it starts there, but it's sort of, there's a mystery, and I want to explore that more. And I really liked the idea that she was open and willing to examine those feelings.
Yeah, exactly. See, and it's often we lament the fact that life has suffering, of course.
Hmm.
It's a rough, tough world that we're thrown into, you might say. And she obviously has had some suffering. And also, you go to higher education, and the environment is so thoroughly secular, and especially in the sciences, they tend to have the predisposition to think of any kind of religiosity or spirituality as simply what people thought before they had science, so
Right, right.
science eclipses all of that, but it
Hmm.
actually does not answer those questions, the
Hmm.
existential questions of life, and what is the life's meaning? They don't address that question. Or what is your meaning? How are you supposed to cope with your situation? But I was going to comment, Scott, that often it's in the bad moments that we start thinking about what is the meaning of things and
Yeah.
start getting more spiritual sensitive. I don't know quite why that is. Maybe because it strips away the more conventional layer. When you're feeling fine and you show up at work or whatever and go home and, hi, family, let's go on a picnic Saturday, or let's take a trip to the beach or something. Okay, there's, what's to think about? You might say your life is just rolling on. But when you have these setbacks, you're kind of thrown back. And and maybe even you might say your sensitivities are more alert because you're going through stuff and you're taking it in.
Yeah.
And one of the things you're taking in is the great questions of life, the existential questions. What can this mean? Does it mean anything? But also a kind of more sensitive opening to let the divine in and become aware of it, as she says right at the beginning. And she puts scare quotes around happened. I just happened to come across you. Okay, she already from the first sentence here knows that, there might be more to this. And that's that sensitivity becoming open, alert, aware, and ready to learn more. And that's all over her wonderful email that she's now in a quest, you might say.
I want to talk a little bit more about Roxana's openness, because this next email that she sends to us um, is really sort of the next sort of steps in a way that she takes stepping into this openness. And before we do, though, I wanted to talk about what she is responding to. Back in the and correct me if I'm wrong, before the book was actually published, you were putting some excerpts on the website, and these are the comments and the responses. Some of these emails that we read from time to time are responses to the chapters that you had put out. So, not in a serial kind of way, like weekly to weekly or whatever, but or maybe you did. This was before I came around. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what she's responding to, because she's responding to a thing you wrote or posted. I am much more than a person.
Yeah, she's gotten to the chapter. It was chapter by chapter. I don't remember the frequency, whether it was weekly or whatever, but it was, yeah, one chapter at a time. And so she's reading them, evidently. It came to her attention. Um, and she's reading them and then pondering each one, which is a good way to read it, actually, not read through if you read the book, and probably true of the podcast as well.
Mm.
Don't just listen to 44 as a schmear, listen to one and then mull it over, take it in, see how it relates to your life and thought. But she's now come to the part where God tells me, I'm a person, I'm a person, but I'm also much more than a person. And that's the section she's commenting on here. And and for someone who's gone through discomfort with the God concept, which many people have for obvious
Mm-hmm.
reasons, seems anthropomorphic and so forth. And then they
Mm-hmm.
may have encountered versions of it. She mentions Bible thumping and so forth in the earlier email. You can come across versions of it that just seem wrong, ludicrous, even wicked, perverse. Anyway, I think here God adds, you don't need to stop there. You can think more about what it would mean for God to be a person. Maybe there's a deeper meaning than you've encountered before in your life. But also, God is much more than a person.
Mm-hmm. So she's responding to that. And this is her second email. It comes just a few months later, and she responds in this way. This is more understandable and believable to me, even though it is hard to grasp. But that does not bother me. I think a lot of what is, will, and cannot be known by us as persons, humans, beyond our comprehension, and that is very comforting and understandable to me. It makes much more sense than religion and doctrine. I need to reread this a few times, at different times. Your experience is very helpful, comfortable to me, more so as this goes on. I do not read this every day, just as it feels right. Keep posting, it helps me. It's hopeful for me. I have questions, though. I also need to look up the theological view Panentheism. I have no formal education in theology at all. And that was Roxana's second email.
Yeah, a very, very serious person here. And we're all serious in our best moments, when we
Yeah,
think
yeah.
about our lives and what the big story is. But anyway, my response at the time to Roxana was, you're reading these posts in the best possible way, just taking in what speaks to you, being enlightened by what you understand, and not disturbed, perhaps even comforted by, as she in fact says, by what is less clear. I very much appreciate your kindness, Roxana, in taking the time to share your reactions with me. It means a lot to me that the posts are meaningful to you. And so I just thought this was a very interesting development that she is reading with this kind of care, sensitivity, uh, not demanding answers, but allowing, you might say, the mystery to unfold and taking some comfort in the idea, well, the mystery is kind of deep, deeper
Right.
than you could just look up in some creedal statement. But there are deeper mysteries here.
Yeah. I liked that in this second one, it shows there are sort of two aspects to it that popped out for me, let me just say. The first is, initially she expressed a willingness to be open. And in this email, the second one, she says, I'm reading more. I'm looking things. And this word panentheism, I don't have any training at all, but I want to, and I'm going to look that up. And she has an openness, and she's following this sort of nudge toward an understanding of God. And yet it's not just, I'm open and it'll just sort of come to me and then I'll just, God is asking her to engage, to do something, to read, to get educated, to, you know what I mean? There seems to be two aspects that are happening here, this willingness to be open, and then a willingness to move forward with where that calling is leading me to. And I felt very strongly that she's on that kind of a path.
Yeah, I'm struck, there's something fundamental here. I'm a philosopher, and so I think, well, what is the nature of thought, you might say, of cognitive processes, of insight? What's the route to insight? And she's got two big elements, and this, in very rough speaking, you might say, are the two biggies. There's feeling. You have to pay attention to your feelings. Your feelings are registering something about reality. They can just be distractions. So feelings themselves have to be processed, and made more mature as you go along, because they can just be static anxiety, fearfulness. You're too agitated to even focus on anything. You don't even know what you feel. But feelings are also picking up stuff. And so if you can relax these anxieties and just say, well, what are my feelings telling me? And there's a lot of psychological studies showing if advice to women, if you feel you don't want to get on the elevator with this guy who just got on, wait, because you're picking up something. It's
There's
hard to
something
say
there.
what you're picking up, but you got to trust those feelings. And there's a lot of life where you have to trust the feelings. However, feelings are just component number one, or step one, or part one. The other is thinking, learning, thinking, dialogue, often with other people, where you trade thoughts. This is how it seems to me, and why I'm thinking this way. Is that how you think, or do you think a different way? Oh, that's interesting. I'll try that out, see if that works. And here, it doesn't have to be formal education, but here she's wondering, the word panentheism had come up, and that's roughly the view that God isn't in the world is in God. The world is comprehended by God. Um, and yet it's not that God is elsewhere. It's the world is comprehended in God, and that more or less fits what we're told early on in God and Autobiography. I guess that's why the term came up. Uh, uh, and kind of thing related to that, she says, I have no formal education in theology. Well, pooh, you don't need that necessarily. It can be very interesting. There are a lot of interesting theologians, but I was struck by her saying that what she's reading in God and Autobiography or this particular chapter, makes much more sense to me, she says, than religion and doctrine. And somehow, some religions, not all of them, but some really got in heavy duty into doctrines where, right at the church door, you enter here, you're supposed to believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's all spelled out. And the theologians have argued out how it should be spelled out and come up with a definitive formulation. And here it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I was struck when attending a conference organized by Calvinist Christians, the Reformed tradition in Protestant Christianity. And the speaker, a young Christian theologian, was saying that the Christianity, in particular in America, had gone through a period in the 20s reacting to a kind of atheist argument against them, where they were trying to prove their doctrines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And 1, 2, 3, 4, they could find the proofs and argue against Darwin or whatever they needed to argue. And this guy thought that was all a big mistake. That's not really what it's about. And he said the alternative way that I guess is catching on more is, instead of saying, let me give you a bunch of arguments, say, let me tell you a story.
Mm.
And, to focus on Christianity for the moment, what are the Gospels? They're the stories of Jesus, right? They're not arguments. They're not a bunch of doctrines and declarations. They're the stories of Jesus, and they're the stories of the Buddha in the Buddhist tradition and of Krishna in the Hindu tradition, and so on. That an awful lot of the meaning of life is found in the stories we live and in the exemplary lives whose stories we learn from.
Roxana's third and final email that she writes to us in this exchange was done just a few months later, and she's responding to a section that you posted called A Word to the Reader. So again, if you'd like to check out what she's responding to on these, they're all found on the website, godandautobiography.com. We'd love to have you come over and take a look at it. But Roxana is responding to that, and she says this: being at one with God is profound. In some ways, I totally understand, but wish I could hear more on this. I really want to be this way, one with his greatness. Doing for others as a reflex, I believe, is one way. Would really love to hear more. And that was the end of that.
Yeah. And of course, I respond at the time, yes, nothing is more profound or more urgent. But how to be in sync with God is a challenge for each of us. Doing for others, which she mentions, overcoming our natural self-centeredness, is surely one key. I'm currently thinking of particular things God has told me that are directly relevant to living in closer attunement with the divine. And I will soon start sharing them on YouTube's, which will be available at this site. Of course, they're up now. Please let me know, Roxana, if you find them helpful. But I was thinking further, just rereading her message. And I might mention one of the things listeners can do is go on the website and comment on Roxana. You can comment on what other people have posted. So feel free to do that. And we've sometimes discussed some of those. But she starts off with the phrase that I'm told is in prayer is crucial. Being at one with God is profound, she says. And I was told the aim is not exactly to merge with God in the sense of lose our identity in God, because there's a multiplicity of persons for a very good reason, and God relates to us in that way. However, I'm told at bottom, we are at one with God, and we need to find that location, you might say, in our own lives for ourselves. And I had the feeling that Roxana is getting there. I mean, this is really coming clear to her, I think. And Because now, instead of speaking with anxiety and endless nervous questions, uh, there's a whole tone to the message that is, I really want to be this way, she says, and doing for others and would love to hear more, So the tone here is not agitated, but very much, you might say, much more at peace.
Hmm. Yeah, reflecting on this, a couple of things came to my mind, but the first thing that popped in was kind of how I think I'm articulating my journey recently. And part of the way I'm doing that is almost trying to articulate this feeling of having come home, a feeling of home. And the story really does start with that 8-year-old boy and singing in the church choir and really just not knowing that there was anything else but me and God. It was just such a natural, easy thing. And then this sort of seeming separation. And then, almost a realization again that as God tells you, at bottom, our soul's will is God's. We are one with God. There is no separation. In the way I articulate it and the way it's understood for me is this actor character relationship, playing a character, and that the character can't be there without me. And yet I am more than the character. So that analogy has really sort of opened things. And I've also realized that it's not something that I got to. I didn't attain it. So the way she talks about it is the way I think I always talked about it too. I want to be this way. Like, in other words, I'm not now, but I want to be one with God. And to me, the way it sort of I got to it, if you want to talk about it in that way, was not I got enough knowledge or had enough experience where I finally got to this place where I realized I am one with God. It was more like, um, Dorothy realizing she was home all along, kind of thing. It's always been that way. The illusion is that there is this separation. That's the kind of thing, when people are talking about, we just want to be in the oneness, and that this isn't real. This isn't real. Well, as a place of perspective, as you mentioned, yes, it is absolutely great and comforting to know that at bottom, God and I are one, that everything is in God, panentheism. So that's very comforting. But then what to do when I have to pay the bills, when I have to come up against somebody who has a different opinion and wants to push back, maybe politically or whatever? What do you do? It's not something you attain. You just sort of realize, we're all starting from the same place, and our individuality is part of the point. Our difference, while it may not ultimately be quote unquote real, it's real in the sense that that's the world. Being in the world means we are these multiplicity, as you say.
Yeah, I think from the point of view of God and autobiography, they're both equally ultimately real.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's not like the Eastern doctrines. Uh, if I was told at one point early uh, about this question, is the world kind of unreal? Uh, well, if it is, God says if it's a mirage, God says it's one you can drink water out of. In other
Right, right,
words,
right.
it has full body, and I don't know myself philosophically what it would mean to say if you can drink water out of it, it's still not real. Well, it means you're honoring some other state that you regard as more important. And
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think that would be a kind of way to interpret that to me, odd claim, but it has a rich lineage. And and I was told, praying about Neil Donald Walsh, who God wants whatever we want, God wants for us. And I thought, well, we want all kinds of crap,
Yeah,
What are you
right.
talking about? And I was told the key is in what you desire. And the question is, which you might say, and
Mm.
what your soul desires is what God desires for you. And I think it was analogized in prayer to the loving parent. What do you want for your kids? Well, you don't want them just to have every toy in sight that they might lust for, every candy bar, but you want what's good for them, right?
Right.
And
Right.
and so the attitude is much like that. What their soul wants, what the loving parent wants, and for what the very best friend wants is for them to be their best person and do the best thing, including, to take Roxana's examples, doing for others. Well, that's a great thing. And when you do it, you find out, although a candy bar or whatever is great, uh, doing for others is also kind of great. You know,
Right.
there are
Right.
deep satisfactions
Yeah.
in living our story in mutuality that way.
Hmm. And there's the side of it when we talk about reality, when we talk about being here, me as Scott, you as Jerry, part of that is internally dealing with our sort of dark side, which what this unit was about, dealing with Zoroaster and God's encounter with Zoroaster, and God really sort of coming to grips with this other side, which has to be there in duality. It's naturally in there. And so doing things for others, I have sometimes struggle with, am I doing this because it's making me feel good? Am I, trying to impose what I think is right on somebody else? Or am I really trying to be open to be there for whatever they might need? There's a duality in there and a struggle inherent in the duality.
Yeah, yeah. But you're right, Scott. That's the challenge. And when Zoroaster is describing, God as the sort of a divided self, a sort of mythological picture of there being two gods, and spins the story out that way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an evil twin that's like God's other side, separated off, sort of like Jekyll and Hyde. Um, and it's mainly that God isn't well integrated, and that has to take place over the course of history. And an awful lot of things like the problems that Roxana is talking about at the beginning, there are inflicted wrong evils, discomforts in her life that I assume, when she says physical, that's something that happened to her. But they're also the internally generated, and that's the body's lack of full integration often. But the anxiety and all of that kind of thing are our own lack of integration, that our parts are flying off in different direction, and we have a desire here, but a fear, maybe the very thing we desire, we also fear. Human beings are very complicated and have a lot of contradictory impulses, and they need to get lined up. But I think she's doing that. It's her sense of being at one with God is, as we were saying before, Scott, coming into focus. It's all coming in focus, so the different pieces are no longer just scattered and out there, including different pieces of ourselves, but the different pieces, things in the landscape, the people, etc., in our lives. But they're coming into kind of a focus that's, you might say, the divine focus.
Mm.
And you get to a point where you're listening and in tune better with the divine, conceived as God or conceived in some other way. Then you are going to have this experience of at oneness and of something more like harmony with
Mm-hmm.
people around you and your own situation, even if it has struggles built into it.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.